Okay, let's talk about a 70-year-old document that, believe it or not, is right at the heart of one of the most intense geopolitical situations in the world today. We're talking about the San Francisco Treaty and how it created the unsettled status of Taiwan.
So this whole issue just blew up again recently. You had a prominent Japanese politician, Sanai Takaichi, basically say, hey, we can't comment on Taiwan's status because of the San Francisco Treaty. And Beijing's response? They were furious, claiming that the treaty is totally illegal and they've never recognized it. So you've got two completely opposite takes on the same document. What is really going on here?
To get what's happening in the headlines today, we really have to go back in time. We need to unpack the treaty that officially ended World War II in Asia and pay really close attention to the words that were used. And, maybe even more importantly, the words that were left out. All right, first up, the San Francisco Treaty itself. This is where this whole idea of a legal vacuum comes from, and it's the key to understanding everything else. You know, Taiwan's legal status went through some huge changes in a pretty short amount of time. First, back in 1895, China's Qing dynasty hands it over to Japan. Fast forward 50 years to 1945, Japan surrenders, and suddenly everything's up in the air. That brings us to the big moment in 1952, the formal peace treaty. Now, the absolute key to this whole thing is one specific word used in Article 2B of the treaty. That word is renounces. It says Japan renounces all right, title, and claim to Taiwan. Legally speaking, that's a very clear, very permanent way of saying, we give it up, it's not ours anymore. And here it is. This is the heart of the matter. The treaty created this legal vacuum because while it's crystal clear that Japan gave up Taiwan, it never, ever says who they give it to. It's like Japan was forced to hand over the keys to the house, but the treaty never named the new owner. And you have to understand, this was not a mistake. It wasn't just some sloppy paperwork. This was a calculated, strategic move. We're in the middle of the Cold War, and the United States wanted to keep Taiwan's future status ambiguous to prevent it from just being handed over to the new communist government in China. That intentional ambiguity is the seed of all the conflict we see today. So, as you can probably guess, this deliberate silence, this legal vacuum, it opened the door for a bunch of different and conflicting ideas about who actually has sovereignty over Taiwan. There are basically three major schools of thought. Okay, so here are the three main camps. First, you have the PRC in Beijing. They say the treaty is totally invalid and that earlier wartime agreements returned Taiwan to China, which of course they claim to be. Then you have the ROC in Taipei. They make a similar argument, but say that they were the rightful government that received it. And finally, you have this third idea, the Taiwan status undetermined theory, which says, look, the treaty was silent, so sovereignty was never actually transferred to anyone. It's still legally undecided. Now that is a great question. You'd think that would settle it, right? The Republic of China and Japan did sign their own treaty, the Treaty of Taipei. But, and this is where it gets really interesting, when you look at the actual legal language, it doesn't clear things up. In fact, it kind of doubles down on the ambiguity. The key is in Article 10 of that treaty. It says, the people of Taiwan shall be deemed to be nationals of the Republic of China. Now, in legal speak, that phrase, shall be deemed, is a huge deal. It signifies something called a legal fiction. It means we're going to treat this as true for practical reasons, even though we're not saying it's legally, factually, the final word. And hey, don't just take my word for it. Japan's own lead negotiator, a man named Eiji Wajima, explained it to his own government. He said, and I'm quoting here, that this was a provisional measure for the convenience of the inhabitants, precisely because the final territorial belonging of Formosa is not yet clear. It was a temporary fix, not a final decision. Okay, so let's zoom out. How has the wider world, and especially the United Nations, handled this messy, ambiguous situation over the decades? Now, you'll often hear Beijing point to this UN resolution 2758 as the final word, the ultimate proof that Taiwan is part of China. But if you actually read the text of the resolution, it's all about who gets to represent China at the UN. It decides to give the seat to the People's Republic of China and kick out the representatives of the Republic of China. But guess what word never appears in the entire resolution? Taiwan. It never says anything about Taiwan's status or its sovereignty.
And what's really fascinating is that in just the last few years, we've seen a growing, coordinated international pushback against Beijing's interpretation. All of these democratic countries and bodies are formally going on the record to clarify that, no, UN Resolution 2758 does not decide Taiwan's status. So if the old treaties are a legal dead end and the international community is starting to push back against old interpretations, where does that leave us? What does this mean for the future? This really is the ultimate question that comes out of that 70-year-old legal vacuum. If Japan gave up the island but never passed it to anyone else, who actually gets to write the final chapter of this story?
And this is where the conversation is really starting to shift. It's moving away from trying to interpret these old, dusty documents and more towards a modern principle of international law, the right of self-determination, the idea that people should get to choose their own political future for themselves.
And that's really the great irony here. This legal ambiguity, this vacuum that was created as a superpower strategy during the Cold War, it had a totally unintended side effect. It created the space for Taiwan to grow and develop into a vibrant democracy. And so, a growing number of people now argue that the right to decide Taiwan's future doesn't belong to old treaties or distant governments, but to the 23 million people who actually live there.